Between 1847 and 1874, 97 people vanished from a hidden mountain town in West Virginia. Not all at once. Not randomly. Every single disappearance happened on the same schedule, every 3 months, on the night of the new moon. And here's the strangest part. Each missing person left behind a single leather shoe, always the left one, placed right in the center of their bed. Inside the shoe was a handful of wet, warm clay, mixed with pine needles, as if scooped fresh from somewhere deep underground. By the time federal investigators finally made it to the remote settlement of Hollow Ridge in the bitter winter of 1874, the pattern had already claimed nearly 100 lives. What they found there was wrong. The town had over 300 residents living like wealthy city folk. Boston clothes, imported food, ledgers filled with unexplained riches, yet not a single person would explain what happened to the missing. Every time investigators asked, they got the exact same answer, in the exact same tone. Greater than, the mountain keeps its own accounts. What the investigators found in the old copper mine beneath Hollow Ridge was locked away in government vaults for more than a century. Even now, parts of that report are still blacked out. And that's where our story begins. Before we go further, if you love true historical horror, make sure you're subscribed, and hit that bell so you don't miss part 2. Drop your city and state in the comments so we know where our dark history family is watching from. Your support helps us dig up more of these buried truths. The founding of Hollow Ridge. The truth about Hollow Ridge doesn't start with the vanishings. It starts with desperation, the kind of desperation that makes people do things they'd never dream of in the light of day. In 1845, a group of 43 families fled the collapsing coal towns of Pennsylvania. The mines had closed, the banks had failed, and their lives had crumbled overnight. They weren't criminals or drifters, they were miners, engineers, craftsmen, people used to hard work. They were led by a man named Josiah Henley, a former mine foreman with a strange talent. He claimed he could smell copper in the rock from a mile away. Henley was in his 50s but moved like someone half his age. Miners who worked with him swore he could hear metal in the stone, pressing his ear to the wall and saying it was singing to him. He had lost his wife to cholera years earlier, and now, with 3 grown sons and grandchildren on the way, he wanted a place where his family, and the families who followed him, could be free. Free from company bosses. Free from the banks. Free to live by their own rules. Henley had a plan, and a secret. The Forbidden Valley. Henley first heard about the valley from a Cherokee guide named Joseph Stonecrow in a Wheeling tavern. Stonecrow told him about a hidden place the Cherokee called the valley where the earth bleeds. A place his people avoided for generations. The legends were unsettling. The ground there was sick, animals refused to live in it, and on moonless nights strange lights moved under the ground. After rain, the streams ran the color of fresh blood. Henley didn't hear danger. He heard opportunity. The guide's warnings only convinced him more. Henley ran quiet surveys, took rock samples, and found copper richer than anything in the region, copper so pure it didn't make sense geologically. If word got out, powerful companies would take it. So he told no one except the families he handpicked in secret meetings. The journey into isolation. It took 3 brutal weeks to reach the valley. They lost 2 wagons to ravines. One family turned back after their youngest nearly drowned crossing a swollen creek. But those who stayed found themselves in a place cut off from the world. Towering mountains trapped the sun. In summer, the valley only saw daylight for 4 hours a day. Dense forests turned noon into twilight. Clouds would spill down the slopes and fill the valley like milk in a bowl, sometimes for days. By autumn of 1846, Hollow Ridge had 200 residents. They wasted no time building. A sawmill ran off the red-stained waters of Burden Creek. A general store opened, run by Marcus Finch, a Philadelphia merchant with an obsession for record-keeping. Those ledgers would one day terrify federal agents. A one-room schoolhouse appeared, stocked with books from a mysterious donor in Baltimore. A Methodist church rose at the town center, its steeple catching the first and only morning light. Reverend Paul Sutterfield preached about providence, but over time his sermons shifted toward sacrifice and covenant. The strange prosperity. From the start, Hollow Ridge was different. They produced refined copper ingots, 99.9% pure, according to Baltimore assayers. But no outsider ever saw the smelting process. Work began at midnight and ended before dawn. Miners entered through a hidden tunnel visitors were never allowed to approach. Ask a miner about his work, and the conversation would shift instantly. Families wouldn't speak of it either. The town had money, too much money. Imported fabrics, fine china, rare foods, all in a place so remote the mail carrier only came once a month. That mail carrier, Daniel Moss, later said the whole town felt like it was watching him, and that no one ever sent personal letters, only copper trade documents. And then, in the winter of 1847, the first person vanished. A teenage girl. Her left shoe was found in the center of her bed. Inside, warm clay, pine needles. It was the first of 97. And whatever was waiting beneath Hollow Ridge had only just begun to feed. If you want me to, I can now write part 2 where the first vanishings escalate, the townspeople close ranks, and the federal government begins to take notice. Do you want me to continue directly into part 2? Part 2, the first to vanish. By the spring of 1847, Hollow Ridge was thriving in ways that didn't make sense. It wasn't just that they had money, it was the kind of money that made people in big cities take notice. The copper they shipped out was different. Telegraph companies paid extra for wire made from Hollow Ridge copper, saying it carried electricity faster and cleaner than anything else. Jewelers in Philadelphia and New York claimed bracelets and rings made from it never tarnished. Even stranger, they said the metal stayed warm to the touch, as if it had its own heartbeat. One scientist, Edmund Whitlock from Harvard, came to investigate that spring. He took notes, studied samples, spoke with Henley, but when he got back to Massachusetts, whole pages of his journal were missing. He refused to talk about Hollow Ridge ever again, quit teaching, and disappeared from public life. The first night, March 15, 1847. 18 months after the founding of Hollow Ridge. A new moon. The spring equinox. That was the night Margaret Dietrich vanished. She was just 19, engaged to Robert Cranston, and her wedding was planned for May. That morning she was laughing with friends, making plans. By sunrise, she was gone. Her parents woke to find her bed perfectly made, like she had never slept in it. The window was wide open, frost creeping on the glass from the freezing night air. And in the very center of her pillow, her left shoe. It was definitely hers, her initials stamped into the leather, but it looked wrong. The sole was worn through in places, as if she'd walked hundreds of miles, though she'd owned them only 2 months. Strange mineral crystals stained the leather, forming patterns that looked like veins, or roots. Inside the shoe was wet clay mixed with pine needles, warm, almost hot, and a smell no one could place. Metallic, organic, unsettling. When her mother tried to dump the clay out, it came out in one piece. It had hardened into a perfect mold of Margaret's foot, every line, every curve. The search. For 3 days, the entire community searched. They divided the forest into grids. Checked every mine shaft, every cave, dragged Burden Creek from one end to the other. Henley himself led search teams up dangerous mountain trails, snow still 3 feet deep. They brought in tracking dogs from another town, but the dogs refused to follow her scent. They whined, pulled away, and refused to go near the woods. What they did find was worse than nothing. Near an old Cherokee marker stone, a huge granite boulder carved with symbols no one could read, they found 17 dead ravens. Arranged in a perfect circle. Still warm, despite the cold. All had died at the same moment, their necks twisted the same way, their wings spread identically. In the center of that circle, a single handprint, pressed deep into the frozen earth. Margaret's handprint, pressed so far down into the ground it was impossible for any living person to make it. From there, fresh axe marks in the trees led to the sealed entrance of what locals called the Old Working, a mine shaft said to be older than the Cherokee themselves. The marks climbed up the trees, starting at the ground and rising 20 feet, as if whoever made them had been walking upward into the air. The second disappearance. June 15, 1847, exactly 3 months later. The summer solstice. This time it was William McCready, 34, strong enough to carry 200 pounds of ore on his back without resting. He was on night watch at the mine's entrance. His replacement, Thomas Finch, arrived at midnight to find the guard post empty. On the stool where William should have been sitting was his left shoe, filled with the same warm clay and pine needles. The mine key was in the shoe, buried in the clay. William's rifle leaned untouched against the wall. His pipe sat on the table, still smoking. The locked mine door stood open. Inside, investigators found footprints starting 30 feet inside the tunnel, like William had simply appeared there out of thin air. The prints led 100 feet deeper, then stopped dead at a solid wall of stone, as if he had walked straight into it. The third disappearance. By September, fear gripped Hollow Ridge. That month, 8-year-old Timothy Cranston vanished in broad daylight. He had been playing outside with other children. One moment he was there, the next, gone. The other children swore it was like a candle going out. His left shoe was found inside the locked church. The clay inside was different this time, it held tiny fragments that looked like crystallized blood. No one could explain it. Families began barricading their homes. Men carried loaded rifles blessed by Reverend Sutterfield. Mothers tied ropes to their children's wrists whenever they went outside. Some tried to leave, but every attempt failed. Sudden illness, broken wagons, freak storms. It was as if the valley itself wouldn't let them go. The meeting. That autumn, with the fog so thick people could barely see their own lanterns, Henley called a town meeting in the church. The whole settlement came, holding hands to avoid getting lost in the mist. Inside, their faces were pale, their eyes tired from months of fear. Henley stood at the pulpit, looking at every man, woman, and child. "We came here, seeking fortune," he said slowly, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. "And fortune demands sacrifice. The mountain gives us copper. Copper gives us wealth. And wealth demands payment. We all understood this when we signed the compact. We all agreed to the terms. The lottery is fair. The selection is random. The obligation is absolute." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "We are not the first to make this bargain. And we will not be the last. The mountain has been feeding for longer than anyone remembers. And it will feed long after we're gone. For now, we are its servants. And it is our provider. The question. That's when Martha Sutterfield, the Reverend's wife, stood up. Her voice was steady, but her face was white. "What did you find in the old working, Josiah?" she asked. "What did you wake up?" Henley said nothing for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed, brittle, covered in writing that wasn't English, wasn't any known language. And yet, somehow, everyone in the room could read it. The meaning poured into their minds like a voice whispering directly inside their skulls. It was then, witnesses would later say, that they felt the mountain begin to breathe. In part 3, we'll uncover what the journal revealed, and why the next disappearance tore the settlement apart. If you want, I can now rewrite part 3 so the story gets darker, the journal's contents are revealed, and the bargain becomes unavoidable. That's where the real horror starts. Part 3, The Price of Copper. The copper pulled from Hollow Ridge was unlike anything found elsewhere. Telegraph companies paid small fortunes for wire made from it, swearing it carried current faster and with less resistance than any competitors. Jewelers in Philadelphia and New York prized it for another reason: ornaments crafted from Hollow Ridge copper never tarnished. They kept their strange, gentle warmth to the touch, as though the metal remembered the sun. In 1847, a Harvard scientist named Edmund Whitlock came to study the phenomenon. He left days later, pale and quiet, his research notes missing several crucial pages. Whitlock retired from academia without explanation, refusing to speak of Hollow Ridge ever again. The first disappearance came on March 15, 1847, 18 months after the settlement was founded. The date would prove important. That night was not only a new moon, but the spring equinox, when day and night stand in perfect balance. Margaret Dietrich, 19, vanished from her family's cabin sometime between sunset and sunrise. She was to marry Robert Cranston, eldest son of William Cranston, in May. Her parents, Friedrich and Anna, woke to find her bed empty, yet her sheets lay perfectly arranged, as if she had never lain in them. The window stood open despite the freezing cold. Ice crusted the inside of the glass. On her pillow sat one of her leather shoes, her left, placed neatly, almost ceremonially. It was filled with damp clay and pine needles, smelling of deep earth, and something else. A metallic tang, organic and unpleasant, that no one could name. Though the shoe was unmistakably hers, her initials were pressed into the leather, it looked years older than it should. The sole was worn through in places, as if it had carried her over hundreds of miles. The leather bore strange mineral stains, crystallized in patterns like veins or roots. When Anna tried to empty it, she found the clay hardened into a perfect mold of Margaret's foot, down to the smallest curve and wrinkle. The search lasted 3 days. The settlers gridded the forest, each family responsible for a section. They searched every cave, every shaft, dragged Bird and Creek from its source to where it joined the Shadow River. Henley himself led teams into treacherous mountain passes still choked with snow. Dogs from a neighboring town were brought in, but when they caught Margaret's scent, they whimpered, turned in circles, and refused to track. What they found instead was worse than finding nothing. Near the old Cherokee marker stone, a granite boulder carved with symbols older than even the Cherokee, according to Joseph Stonecrow, they found 17 dead ravens. They lay in a perfect circle, bodies still warm despite the cold. Each bird's neck was twisted at the same angle, wings spread in identical positions. In the center of the ring, pressed deep into the frozen earth, was a handprint. Margaret's handprint. Somehow, it had sunk into the ground deeper than any human hand could press. Fresh axe marks scarred trees, forming a strange path toward the sealed entrance of what locals called the Old Working, an ancient mine that legend claimed existed before the first people. The cuts were made at heights starting at the ground and rising nearly 20 feet up, as though the cutter had been climbing through the air. The marks themselves were stranger still, angled in ways that made the eyes ache, forming patterns that seemed almost familiar, but refused to be understood. 3 months later, on June 15, the summer solstice, William Macready disappeared. He was 34, strong enough to carry 200 pounds of ore for miles. That night, he was posted as watchman at the mine entrance. When his replacement, Thomas Finch, arrived at midnight, the post was empty. On the stool sat a single shoe, left, like Margaret's, filled with clay and pine needles, still warm to the touch. Inside was the key to the mine door. Macready's rifle leaned untouched against the wall, and his tobacco pipe lay on the table, still curling smoke. The mine door was unlocked, but inside they found something more chilling than his absence. Footprints began 30 feet inside the tunnel, as if he had materialized from thin air, and led 100 feet deeper before ending abruptly at a solid wall of stone. By September, fear ruled the settlement. The third disappearance took place under bright afternoon sun. 8-year-old Timothy Cranston vanished while playing with other children. They swore he'd been there one moment and gone the next, like a snuffed candle. His shoe was found in the center of the locked church. Reverend Sutterfield held the only key. This shoe's clay contained something new, tiny fragments of crystallized blood. No one could explain how blood could harden into such glittering shards. Panic gripped Hollow Ridge. Families barricaded doors, men patrolled with rifles loaded with bullets blessed in the church. Mothers tied ropes to their children's wrists whenever they left the house. Some families tried to leave, but their wagons broke, their children fell ill, or sudden storms blocked the road. It was as if the valley itself refused to let them go. On a night when the fog lay so thick that one could barely see a few feet ahead, Josiah Henley called the entire town to the church. People arrived in clusters, holding hands so no one would vanish into the mist. Lantern lights swam in the fog like pale halos. Henley stood before them, his voice carrying unnervingly clear through the gloom. Those who survived later claimed they remembered every word, not just the meaning, but the cadence, as though the speech had been burned into their minds. "Greater than, we came here seeking fortune," Henley said, "and fortune demands sacrifice. The mountain gives us copper, copper gives us wealth, and wealth demands payment. We all understood this when we signed the compact. We all agreed to the terms. The lottery is fair. The selection is random. The obligation is absolute. We are not the first to make this bargain, and we will not be the last. The mountain has been feeding longer than human memory, and it will feed long after we are gone. But for now, it is our provider, and we are its servants." Martha Sutterfield, the Reverend's wife, rose then, her voice trembling. "What did you find in the old working, Josiah? What did you wake up?" Henley's answer was to draw a leather-bound book from beneath his coat. The pages were brittle and yellowed, covered in a script older than any known tongue. Yet as he opened it, every person in the church could read it. The meaning slid directly into their minds without translation, ancient, inevitable, and binding. I kept the historical mystery intact, heightened the pacing, and preserved the creeping dread for continuity into Part 4. Part 4, The Compact. The night after Henley read from the book, no one slept. Though the church was locked and the meeting ended, the words clung to them. People claimed they could still hear them echoing in their heads, as if the sound had been etched into bone. More than one person swore they'd heard an extra voice speaking along with Henley's, a deeper, older voice, overlapping his like two pieces of glass held together. By dawn, the fog had thickened, swallowing the valley. The mountains were gone from sight. Even the sound of Burden Creek was muffled, as though the water now ran under layers of cloth. Henley called for the town elders to gather in his home. Joseph Stonecrow refused at first, saying no good thing ever came from a council meeting called under fog, but finally appeared, his expression grim, clutching a pouch of herbs he claimed would keep away listening things. Inside Henley's parlor, the elders sat at the long oak table. On it lay the leather-bound book, closed, its cover showing no title, only a faint embossing that looked like overlapping spirals. The air around it was colder than the rest of the room. Henley began without preamble. Greater than, the compact predates us. It predates the Cherokee. The copper is not merely ore, it is blood, memory, and promise bound into stone. Every generation here owes a debt. He told them of his discovery 2 years before, while surveying an abandoned shaft. The old working, he said, was older than any mine made by man. The tunnels curved in ways no human hand could design, angles that bent the eye, walls that seemed to breathe when you weren't looking directly at them. At its deepest point, he found a chamber where the walls pulsed faintly, like the throat of some buried creature. And in the center, resting upon a stone plinth, was the book. He had not picked it up. The book, he claimed, had opened for him on its own. And though the script was unreadable, its meaning filled his mind instantly. The terms were simple. Every equinox and solstice, one life would be given. The chosen would be taken whole, without struggle, and leave behind their left shoe. In return, the copper would never run dry, nor would it lose its strange power. Henley had agreed without speaking. The choice, he said, was never mine to make. It had been made before my father's father's father was born. Stonecrow interrupted then, his voice sharp. You think you made a bargain? Fool. You walked into its mouth and called it a doorway. The others fell silent. Stonecrow told them that his grandmother's grandmother had spoken of Hollow Ridge as a place the earth itself avoided, a wound in the world, where something ancient and unsatisfied lay beneath the roots of the mountains. The copper is its lure, Stonecrow said. It calls men here with promises. And once they take, they cannot leave. Still, none of them left that room. Fear is a strange tether, it can bind tighter than greed. That spring, on the night of the next equinox, the lottery was drawn. Names were written on slips of paper and placed into the leather bag Henley had brought from the old working. Only he reached inside. When he drew the slip, his face did not change. He read the name aloud. Martha Sutterfield. The Reverend shouted, lunging for Henley, but the other elders held him back. Martha herself stood still, her face pale but calm. She removed her left shoe without being asked, setting it gently on the table. Henley handed the shoe to her husband. It will be returned to you, he said. She was taken to the church, where she spent the night alone. Guards were posted at the doors. None saw her leave, but by morning, the shoe was on the altar, filled with clay and pine needles. The guards swore they heard nothing, only a faint humming from somewhere deep below the floorboards. The years that followed the same grim rhythm. 4 times a year, the name was drawn, the shoe was placed, and the copper flowed without end. The settlement grew wealthy. Telegraph lines stretched, jewelry shops thrived, and Hollow Ridge became a name spoken with a mix of envy and unease. But the mountain always took more than it gave. By 1853, children were born with strange marks on their skin, spiral patterns like those on the book's cover. Some grew faint by adolescence, others deepened into ridges that could be felt under the fingertips. Livestock began vanishing on nights between the appointed dates. Always the same sign, the left hoof missing, replaced by a hardened mold of clay and pine needles. Stonecrow warned them this meant the hunger was growing, but no one listened. The copper prices had reached record highs. Even those who hated the lottery would not abandon the fortune it brought. The breaking point came in the winter of 1854. The lottery was drawn as usual, but when the name was read, Thomas Finch, the man refused. He spat on the book, cursed Henley, and barricaded himself in his cabin with his family. That night, the fog rolled in thicker than ever before. No one saw Finch leave his home, yet by morning, the cabin was empty. Every door and window was locked from the inside. In the center of the cabin floor was a spiral carved deep into the wood, filled with black water that did not reflect the lantern light. Around it lay 4 shoes, all left, all belonging to Finch's family. The black water began to sink slowly into the spiral, vanishing into the wood grain. By nightfall, it was gone. After that, there were no refusals. Henley aged quickly. His once dark hair turned the same pale greenish-gray as the copper ore. His skin took on the same faint warmth as the jewelry sold in Philadelphia. Some whispered that if you touched his wrist for too long, you could feel a second heartbeat there. By the time the federal surveyors arrived in 1856, Hollow Ridge was prosperous but strangely empty. The census showed far fewer residents than the town's size suggested. When asked where the missing families had gone, Henley simply said, "Greater than, they paid their share." The surveyors stayed only one night. The fog that came after sundown was unlike anything they had seen, silent, heavy, and smelling faintly of pennies. In the morning, they left without finishing their maps. One of their party, a young draftsman, did not leave at all. His shoe was found on the steps of the old working, filled with damp clay and pine needles. By the end of that decade, the book had passed from Henley's hands to a new keeper. It was never destroyed, never hidden, only carried forward, its spirals deepening, its pages gaining a faint coppery sheen. Stonecrow was gone by then. Some said he left in the night, others swore they saw him vanish into the fog without leaving footprints. His house stood empty, yet from time to time, smoke still rose from its chimney on fog-bound mornings. And always, in the silence before dawn, the town could hear the faint humming, not from the church, nor the old working, but from the earth itself, as if the mountain was breathing, waiting for its next name. I've left this ending open so Part 5 can shift into either deeper supernatural revelations or the arrival of outsiders who threaten to break the cycle. Do you want me to take Part 5 into an escalation where the hunger grows beyond the agreed terms, or keep it on the mystery horror slow burn? Part 5, The Breach. By the spring of 1861, the compact had gone unbroken for more than 30 years. The copper still ran bright in the veins of Hollow Ridge, and the townsfolk wore their wealth on their fingers, their necks, and in the silver buttons on their coats. Outsiders spoke of it as a blessed place, until they came too close. That year, the war broke out. Most men of Hollow Ridge had no taste for leaving the mountains, but the Confederacy sent recruiters, and the valley could not hide forever. A handful of young men left, taking the road east, swearing to return once the fighting was done. They did not. Henley, now an old man with skin almost the same color as tarnished copper, said nothing about their fate. But those who watched closely noticed something. For 3 seasons in a row, the lottery was skipped. No names drawn, no shoes on the altar. Stonecrow's absence was still a shadow in the town, and more than one elder muttered that his warnings had been right, that the hunger would not wait politely for its due. On the night of the autumn equinox, the fog rolled in thicker than any in living memory. It did not creep, it pushed. It came up the valley walls in a single wave, blotting out the moon. People shut their doors and lit lamps, but the light only reached a few feet before vanishing into the white. Then came the sound, low at first, like wind in a cavern, but swelling until it was felt more than heard. It seemed to pulse in time with the heartbeat of the earth itself. By morning, 3 houses stood empty. Not just empty, hollow. The furniture, the clothes, even the nails in the floorboards were gone, as if the rooms had never been lived in. On the bare ground where each front door had been, a single left shoe sat filled with damp clay and pine needles. Henley called the elders together. His voice, once strong, now cracked like old wood. "Greater than, it is not bound any more," he said. "The terms were ours to keep. We broke them, and it will not wait for our order." The elders argued. Some wanted to leave immediately, to take their families and vanish into the mountains. Others insisted the hunger would follow wherever they went, that the only safety was in restoring the compact. The decision came too late. A week later, a group of surveyors arrived from Knoxville, sent to map potential railway routes. They were cheerful, confident men, carrying steel instruments and bright brass compasses. They stayed at the inn, laughed loudly over their suppers, and spoke openly of cutting a tunnel straight through the ridge to shorten the line. The townsfolk avoided them. The innkeeper's wife served their meals without a word. Children were called indoors if they lingered too near. On the second night, the fog came early, before sunset. It cooled in the street like spilled milk, curling around the surveyors' boots as they stood smoking on the porch. By morning, only one remained. He was found standing in the middle of Main Street, bareheaded, his eyes wide and glassy. He held a single left shoe in both hands. When asked where his companions were, he only whispered, "Greater than, the walls moved." He left the valley that day, walking barefoot until the road vanished into the trees. The breach widened. Every few nights, the fog came and something vanished, sometimes a person, sometimes an animal, sometimes an entire place. The old tannery disappeared in its entirety, leaving behind a spiral burned into the ground, its grooves filled with black water that reflected nothing. Henley aged faster in those months than in the 30 years before. His copper-tinted skin grew mottled, and a tremor took hold of his hands. Still, he insisted on keeping the book in his possession. Some whispered that he no longer read from it, that it read from him. On the winter solstice, the elders attempted to restore the compact. Names were drawn, 4 lives offered in a single night. Their shoes were placed on the altar, filled as tradition demanded. But when the fog came, it passed through the church as though the building were smoke. The names did not matter anymore. In January, a group of desperate townsfolk descended into the old working. They carried lanterns, rope, and pickaxes, swearing they would find the chamber Henley had described and bargain directly. Only 2 returned. Their faces were pale as salt, their eyes ringed in deep red. They spoke little, except to say that the tunnels had changed. "Greater than, it's not down there anymore," one whispered. "It's everywhere now." With spring came strangers, prospectors, soldiers, wanderers, drawn by rumors of unclaimed copper and abandoned homes. Most did not leave. Their camps vanished overnight, leaving behind cold ashes and the telltale single shoe. One soldier's diary was found in the mud outside the ridge. The last entry read, "Greater than, saw her in the fog. Thought it was my sister, calling my name. The closer I got, the taller she seemed. Her eyes, not eyes. 2 spirals, opening and opening." By midsummer, the valley was quieter than it had ever been. No bird song, no creak of wagon wheels. Even the creek seemed to flow slower, its surface tinged faintly green, as if the copper had seeped into its veins. Henley died that August. He was found in his home, seated at his desk, the book open before him. His right hand rested on the page, fingers sunk into it as though the leather were clay. His left shoe was missing. The book was gone. Some believe the hunger took it back, sealing the compact forever. Others think it passed to another keeper, someone outside Hollow Ridge, someone who carries it now, perhaps reading aloud in some other quiet valley, beginning the cycle again. Those who lived through that year rarely spoke of it afterward. When they did, they called it the breach, the season when the fog no longer obeyed the bargain and the mountain began to feed without end. And on certain nights, when the wind comes down from the ridge carrying the smell of damp clay and pennies, the oldest among them still lock their doors and whisper the same warning Stonecrow once gave. Greater than, you don't bargain with hunger. You just hope it doesn't know your name. If you want, I can take part 6 into a more intense Outsiders Enter Danger arc where someone tries to uncover the truth, or into a generational echo where descendants in the present day rediscover the story. Which direction should we take next? Part 6, The Last Keeper. By the time autumn returned to Hollow Ridge, only a dozen families remained. Most were too stubborn to leave. Some were too poor. A few believed, against all reason, that the fog would tire of them. It didn't. The fog no longer came in waves. It hung low every morning now, a pale curtain between the living and the dead. People walked quickly, keeping their heads down, pretending not to see. Shapes moving just out of sight. Then, one night, a light appeared on the ridge. Not firelight, not lantern glow. It was green, deep and shifting, like sunlight through deep water. That was when Maeve Sutter decided to climb the mountain. Maeve was not from Hollow Ridge. She had arrived the year before, after the breach, searching for her missing brother, a surveyor who had vanished in the fog. The townsfolk avoided her at first. She asked too many questions, stayed out too late, and showed no fear of the ridge. She had found the soldier's diary half buried near the creek. She had followed hoofprints that ended abruptly at a bare patch of clay. She had seen, more than once, the single shoe. When Henley died, she was the only one who asked where the book had gone. The elders would not answer her. On the night she set out, Maeve carried only a lantern, a length of rope, and a pack containing a loaf of bread, a tin of salt, and her brother's pocket watch. The watch no longer ticked, but she wound it every morning out of habit. She climbed the ridge path slowly, the fog parting just enough for her to see the stones under her boots. The green light pulsed ahead, drawing her higher. Somewhere above her, something was breathing. She reached the old working before midnight. The entrance was half collapsed, but the green glow leaked through the cracks. Maeve wedged herself inside, the stone cold against her shoulders, and descended into the dark. The tunnels were not as the survivors had described. They were smooth, spiraled, like the inside of a seashell. The air smelled of wet pennies. Her lantern guttered as she reached the first chamber. There, in the center of the floor, lay the book. It was open, its pages writhed, the ink shifting like minnows in a stream. Maeve stepped closer. She saw words forming, names. Dozens of names. Some she recognized. The young men who had left for war and never returned. The surveyors. The families whose homes had gone hollow. And then, her brother's name. Beneath it, a name she didn't know, Maeve Sutter. The breathing grew louder. From the walls, something began to uncoil. It was not one thing, but many, a braid of shadows and copper veins, its body bending the air as it moved. Maeve could not see its face, but she felt it, spirals opening in her mind, wider and wider. It spoke without sound. You came to bargain. Her hand shook, but she forced the words out. Greater than, take me. Let the others go. The spirals widened. The bargain is broken. She stepped forward, salt spilling from her pack onto the floor. Greater than, then make a new one. I'll keep the book. I'll call the names. Just leave Hollow Ridge. Dash dash dash. For a moment, the breathing stopped. The spirals froze. Then, slowly, the thing withdrew into the walls. The green light faded until only the lantern's glow remained. The book lay still on the stone floor. Maeve picked it up. It was warm, almost feverish, to the touch. When she left the chamber, the tunnels were straight again. Dash dash dash. In the weeks that followed, the fog thinned. The disappearances stopped. Birds returned to the trees. People began to speak in cautious voices about rebuilding. Maeve was rarely seen in town after that. She kept to a small cabin at the base of the ridge, where a single lamp burned in her window every night. Those who visited said she looked pale, older, and that she kept one hand resting on a leather-bound book whenever she spoke. No one ever saw her left shoe. Dash dash dash. Years passed. Children grew up hearing stories about the woman on the ridge who had struck a bargain with the hunger. They were told never to knock on her door after sunset. One winter, a boy went missing. His shoe was found at the edge of the creek. The townsfolk went to Maeve's cabin, demanding to know if she had called his name. She said nothing, only closed the door and barred it. The next spring, 3 strangers came through Hollow Ridge, asking after a woman with copper in her skin and a book bound in human leather. No one admitted to knowing her. By autumn, Maeve's cabin stood empty. The lamp in the window still burned. Dash dash dash. Now, more than 60 years have passed. Hollow Ridge is a ghost town. The buildings stand, but their windows gape black and empty. The creek runs silent. The air smells faintly of damp clay. Every so often, hikers stumble across the place. They find the streets overgrown, the church door hanging from its hinges. Some say they've seen a light high on the ridge, a green pulse, deep as the sea. A few claim they've found a book in the dust, warm to the touch, its pages filled with names they don't recognize, until they reach the last one. Their own. Dash dash dash. That is the story as the last survivors told it. The breach, the hunger, the bargain remade. And the warning, always the warning. Greater than, you don't bargain with hunger. You only pass it on. Part 7, The Green Pulse. The night the 2 hikers saw the green light, they thought it was just the northern lights, until it moved. They were camped near the tree line, the last stretch of forest before the ridge turned to bare stone. The older hiker, Jim Calloway, was an ex-park ranger who had walked most of the state's backcountry. His niece, Leah, had never been more than 10 miles from the city. When the light rose over the ridge like a breath being held, Leah laughed. Greater than, Aurora, she said, snapping a photo. But the camera showed nothing, just darkness and mist. Dash dash dash. The light pulsed again. This time it came with a sound. Not loud, but deep, like a whale song stretched until it became a vibration in their bones. Jim didn't say a word. He just reached for the lantern and began packing their gear. Greater than, we're leaving? Leah asked. Not staying, he said. Not up here. Dash dash dash. The trail back was steeper than she remembered. They had gone barely a mile when the fog slid between the trees, thick enough to bead on their jackets. Leah shivered. Greater than, what's the big deal? It's just light. Jim didn't look at her. I worked search and rescue for 15 years. I've seen a lot of folks go missing in these woods. Only one thing they had in common. What? They saw the light. Dash dash dash. The fog thickened until the trail vanished. Jim stopped, lantern held high. A shape was moving through the white, slow, deliberate, as though it had all the time in the world. Leah's throat tightened. There. Then the shape resolved into a person. It was a woman, tall, thin, wearing a long coat that might have once been green but was now the color of moss and age. In her left hand, she held a lantern that glowed faintly copper. Her right hand rested on a book bound in cracked leather. Jim took a step back. Greater than, ma'am, we're just passing through. The woman's eyes flicked toward him, and he stopped speaking. They were the color of deep water under ice. She turned her gaze to Leah. Greater than, name, she said. Leah swallowed. Leah Calloway. The woman tilted her head, as though listening to something only she could hear. Her fingers brushed the book's spine. Greater than, not yet, she murmured. But soon. The fog shifted, and she was gone. Leah grabbed her uncle's arm. Greater than, what was that? Jim didn't answer. His hand was shaking so badly the lantern rattled against its hook. They made it to the trailhead just after dawn. Jim drove the whole way home without saying a word. That night, Leah dreamed of the ridge. She saw the green light pulsing, felt it in her chest like a second heartbeat. The woman stood beside her, whispering names in a voice like falling water. The last name she whispered was Leah's. 2 weeks later, Leah started seeing the fog in places it didn't belong, curling through alleyways, drifting along the edges of parking lots. Once, she saw a shape moving inside it, slow and deliberate. She called Jim. Greater than, it's here, she said. Leave, he told her. Don't pack, just leave. She didn't. On the third night, the fog seeped under her apartment door. The lights flickered. From the corner of the room, a voice said, it's time. Leah turned. The woman from the ridge stood in her living room, her coat damp, her book open. Greater than, I don't understand, Leah whispered. The woman stepped closer. You don't have to. You only have to take it. She held out the book. Leah's hands moved without her meaning them to. The leather was warm, fever warm. Words swam on the page, shifting until they formed her name. Beneath it was another, Maeve Sutter. The letters of that second name began to fade. Greater than, what happens if I take it? Leah asked. The woman's eyes glimmered. You'll live, and you'll keep the bargain. Leah felt the spirals open in her mind, the green light filling every corner. She heard the breathing, deep and slow, like the world itself was inhaling. She looked down at the book. Her own name grew darker, ink sinking deep into the page. When she looked up again, she was alone. The fog was gone. The air smelled of damp clay. That was 3 years ago. Now, when hikers go missing near Hollow Ridge, people say it's the green light. Some say they've seen a young woman in a moss-colored coat watching from the trees, her hand on a leather-bound book. And sometimes, on very still nights, they say you can hear a voice in the fog, asking one question. Greater than, name, If you like, I can move on to part 8 next, keeping the same 1,000-word eerie pacing so the Hollow Ridge cycle keeps expanding. Do you want me to continue with part 8? Part 8, The Last Journal. The call came to Sheriff David Mercer just after 2 a.m. Another missing hiker. Mercer had been on the job long enough to know that missing hiker in Hollow Ridge was code for we're never finding them alive. But this one was different. The woman who made the call wasn't panicked. She sounded almost calm, her voice steady as she gave her name, Maeve Sutter. The name meant nothing to Mercer until he got to the trailhead and saw the photograph the search team had pulled from the ranger station's file cabinet. Maeve had vanished 3 years earlier. Same ridge, same strange green light reported by campers that night. So why had she just called in? Mercer followed the search team into the fog. The ground was slick with dew, and the air smelled faintly metallic, like old coins rubbed between fingers. They found her about a mile in. She was sitting cross-legged on the ground, wearing a long green coat that looked soaked through but didn't drip. In her lap was a leather-bound book. "Greater than, Maeve Sutter?" Mercer asked, keeping his voice even. She looked up at him and smiled. "Greater than, it's not Maeve anymore," she said. She held out the book, and Mercer saw his own name written on one of the pages in looping black ink. Underneath was the name Caleb Rowe, a local man who'd gone missing 2 winters back. "Greater than, what is this?" Mercer asked. Maeve shrugged. "It's the ledger. We keep the names. Greater than, we." Her smile widened, and in the reflection of her eyes, Mercer thought he saw a green pulse, steady, alive. The fog thickened. One of the deputies called out, swearing he'd seen someone moving through the trees. Then another voice echoed back, a perfect mimicry of the deputy's own words. Mercer turned back to Maeve, but she was already standing. "Greater than, it's time for you to decide," she said. "Take the book, or join the fog." A shape began to emerge behind her. Tall, thin, wearing the same moss-colored coat, only older, darker. Mercer realized this must be the woman from the older stories, the one Jim Calloway had spoken of before he disappeared. The woman's gaze locked on him. "Name," she said. Mercer's throat went dry. "David Mercer." The book's pages fluttered, stopping on a blank sheet. The ink bled up from nowhere, curling into the letters of his name. The air seemed to fold in on itself. The forest dimmed, not from shadow, but as if the light itself had been drained. Mercer could hear something breathing beneath the earth. Slow, heavy, patient. Maeve closed the book with a soft thud. "It's done." The older woman stepped back into the fog, vanishing like a stone dropped in deep water. The search team never found Maeve, or Mercer. 2 days later, the sheriff's truck was discovered on the side of the logging road. The keys were still in the ignition. On the passenger seat lay a leather-bound book. Every page was filled with names, some dating back over a century. The last entry read, "David Mercer, Keeper, .. Months passed. The county held a special election to replace the sheriff. People stopped talking about the missing, except in low voices over drinks. The fog on the ridge grew thicker that summer, rolling down into the valleys more often than before. And then the stories began again. Campers swore they'd seen a man in a dark coat standing just beyond their campfires. He carried a lantern and a book. His eyes glimmered faint green in the light. Sometimes he asked for their name. Sometimes he just watched. One boy, 12 years old, braver than he should have been, claimed he'd spoken to the man. "Greater than, he said the fog isn't dangerous unless you belong to it," the boy told his mother. "And he said once you're written in, you can't be erased." The mother laughed it off. But she didn't take him camping anymore. Late that autumn, a hiker named Erica Dunn went missing. Her sister swore she got a voicemail the night after, Erica's voice whispering, "Don't say your name." When the sister played the message for police, the recording was gone. Just static. There's one more piece of this, and it's not in any official report. A retired ranger named Lee Harmon says he was hiking the ridge last month when the fog rolled in faster than it should. He ducked under a ledge to wait it out. Through the mist, he saw Mercer, the same uniform, the same weary eyes, but older, like years had passed since he'd been sheriff. Mercer knelt in the fog, opening the leather book. The green light bled from between the pages. "Greater than, Lee," he said without looking up. "I can't stop writing them." Lee ran. Now, the ledger is said to still be out there. Passed from keeper to keeper, the ink always fresh. And when the green pulse rises over Hollow Ridge, People stay indoors, lock their doors, and avoid the temptation to answer any voice that comes from the fog. Because the first thing it asks for is your name. And the last thing you'll hear is the sound of the page turning. If you want, I can take this into part 9 next, pushing the legend toward its climax and revealing the deeper reason for the book and the green light. That's where things will get even stranger. Do you want me to send part 9 now? Part 9, The Keeper's Debt. The snow came early that winter, blanketing Hollow Ridge in silence. The locals said the fog moved differently in the cold. It didn't drift, it clung, curling low to the ground like it was trying to find something. Or someone. 3 months after Sheriff Mercer's disappearance, the county hired a new sheriff, Lydia Cross. She was younger than most expected, sharp-eyed, with a habit of carrying a small notebook in her coat pocket. When asked about the disappearances, she said she didn't believe in mountain ghosts or glowing fog. But the older deputies noticed she avoided the ridge after dark. It was Deputy Harlan who first told her about the ledger. He'd been in Mercer's office when they found it. Said the thing felt wrong in his hands, like it was too warm, like it had a heartbeat. Harlan had taken a single photo of one page before the state investigators took it away. On that page was a date from 1894, and a name that Harlan recognized from his own family tree. Lydia didn't believe it, not at first. But then she got the call from Erica Dunn's sister. The woman was crying so hard Lydia could barely make out the words. Greater than, she said not to give my name, but I think I already did. The phone went dead. That night, Lydia drove up to the ridge. She parked the cruiser, stepped into the snow, and let the fog swallow her. The cold bit into her skin, but there was something else beneath it, a pulse. Slow. Rhythmic. The same way your chest rises and falls when you're just about to fall asleep. The fog wasn't weather. It was breathing. She found him near the old fire tower. Mercer. He was standing by the broken railing, coat dusted with frost, lantern in one hand, the ledger in the other. His eyes glowed faintly green, like light through moss. Greater than, you shouldn't be here, he said. Greater than, I'm here for the people who never came back, Lydia replied. I'm here for you. He looked down at the book. It doesn't work that way. Once a name's in here, it belongs to the fog. Lydia stepped closer. Greater than, what is it? Mercer hesitated, then opened the book. The pages weren't paper. They were thin, translucent, almost alive. Words weren't written in ink, but in something that shimmered like liquid moonlight. Greater than, it started with one person, Mercer said quietly. A woman named Eleanor Vexley. Winter of 1863. She made a bargain. Lydia's breath fogged in the cold air. What kind of bargain? Mercer's voice was low. The ridge was starving her town. Crops failed, animals disappeared. She asked the fog to spare them. It agreed, if she gave it a name every winter. The name had to be offered willingly. Lydia frowned. And the ledger? Greater than, it's the contract, Mercer said. Passed from one keeper to the next. If a name is written, the fog takes them. But the keeper stays. Lydia studied him. You're not dead. Mercer's smile was bitter. Not alive either. I can't leave the ridge. The fog feeds me just enough to keep me useful. Something moved behind them. A tall figure in a tattered green coat emerged from the mist, her face shadowed, her steps soundless. Mercer's voice tensed. Greater than, she's the one who brought me in. When she's done with me, you'll take my place. The woman's gaze fixed on Lydia. Her voice was a whisper that carried like wind through pine needles. Greater than, name, dash dash dash. Lydia reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her notebook. She tore a page free, scribbled something on it, and held it up. Greater than, you want a name? Take this one. The green-eyed woman studied it. For the first time, Lydia saw something like hesitation cross her face. Mercer leaned toward her. What did you write? Greater than, mine, Lydia whispered. But I didn't give it. I wrote it down. There's a difference. Dash dash dash. The fog stirred violently, curling around her boots like it was trying to climb. The woman hissed, a sound like wind over broken glass, and stepped back into the mist. Mercer shut the ledger. That bought you time. Not much. Dash dash dash. Lydia looked at him hard. Then tell me, how to end this. Mercer hesitated, glancing at the swirling fog. You can't destroy the ledger. It's older than the ridge. But you can unbind it, if the first name is erased. Greater than, Eleanor Vexley. He nodded. You'll have to find her page. And if you do, the fog will come for both of us. Dash dash dash. When Lydia returned to town, she started digging. Old church records, miners' journals, weather logs. Most didn't mention Eleanor by name. But one scrap of paper, torn from a diary in 1864, spoke of a green light on the snow, and a woman who walked into it without looking back. The diary ended mid-sentence. Dash dash dash. By January, Lydia had a plan. She'd go up the ridge alone during the full moon, when the fog was strongest, and she'd find Eleanor's page. But she didn't tell anyone. She knew if she said it out loud, the fog would hear. Dash dash dash. The night came. She strapped a flashlight to her coat, a flare in her pocket, and her notebook in her hand. The snow was deep, the fog thicker than she'd ever seen. Every step forward felt like walking into the ocean, sound muffled, light swallowed. Mercer was waiting at the fire tower. His hands shook as he held the ledger out to her. Greater than, last chance to turn back, he said. She took it. Open to the first page. Dash dash dash. The book resisted, its pages stiff and curling. When it finally opened, Lydia saw a single name written in a hand that seemed older than the paper itself, Eleanor Vexley. The letters pulsed faint green. Greater than, erase it, Mercer said. Fast. Dash dash dash. Before she could move, the woman in the green coat appeared, closer than before, her face pale and weathered, eyes burning like two lanterns in the mist. The fog surged around them, howling without wind. Lydia gripped her flare. Greater than, do it, Mercer shouted. She struck the flare's cap. It hissed to life, red light cutting through the green. The fog recoiled. The letters on the page began to fade. The woman screamed, a sound that split the air, and lunged for the book. Lydia pressed the flare's tip to the paper. The name burned away. Dash dash dash. The ledger slammed shut. The green light vanished, and for the first time in years, the fog thinned. But Mercer was gone. Only his lantern remained, still warm in her hand. Dash dash dash. That was the last recorded sighting of the ledger. Some say Lydia burned it. Others think she became the new keeper and hides it, waiting for the next bargain. But hikers still whisper of a woman in a sheriff's coat who walks the ridge at night, lantern in one hand, a blank book in the other. And if she asks for your name, you'd better hope you don't say it. Dash dash dash. If you're ready, I can send part 10 next. The final part, where the legend comes full circle and ties back to the earliest disappearances. That's where all the threads will meet. Do you want me to send part 10 now? Part 10, the last name. The ridge was quiet for almost a year after the night Lydia Cross erased Eleanor Vexley's name. No glowing fog, no missing hikers. People started calling it the thaw. But if you listened carefully, the old-timers never said the danger was gone. They just said it was waiting. Dash dash dash. The first to notice something was wrong again was Harold Pike, who ran the gas station at the edge of town. It was late October, a few days before the first snow, when a woman came in just before closing. She was wearing a sheriff's coat, old, worn, not the kind deputies wore now. She didn't buy anything, just walked the aisles, touching things lightly, like she was remembering them. When she passed Harold on the way out, she said something he never forgot. Greater than, it's colder on the ridge this year. Names will freeze faster. He didn't understand what she meant until he saw the small leather-bound book in her hand. Dash dash dash. In November, the fog came back. It wasn't as thick as before, but it moved with purpose, low and curling, following the creek beds and fence lines until it reached the road. Lydia Cross was gone. No resignation, no transfer, just vanished. And that's when the disappearances started again. Dash dash dash. The county sent search teams, just like they had with Mercer. Same results. No tracks, no signs of struggle, just personal belongings left behind in the snow. But there was one difference this time. Every search team came back with the same story. At some point, they'd hear footsteps behind them, slow and steady. When they turned, there was no one there. Dash dash dash. Deputy Harlan couldn't shake the feeling that Lydia hadn't failed, she'd finished something. And whatever bargain had been broken, something else had taken its place. He started going through her office. Most of the files were standard police work. But in the bottom drawer, under a false panel, he found her old notebook. The last entry was dated the night she disappeared. Greater than, if I'm not back, it's because I'm keeping watch. Tell them not to speak their names out loud. Written words last longer. Dash dash dash. Harlan drove up the ridge alone. The fog was there, waiting. At the fire tower, he found a lantern burning faintly, same as Mercer's had been. On the ground beside it was a new ledger. This one wasn't old or brittle. The leather was fresh, the pages clean, but there were already names written inside. The first was Lydia Cross. The last one was his. Dash dash dash. Harlan staggered back, heart pounding. He hadn't told anyone he was coming here. How could the book have known? Then he heard it, a slow crunch of boots in the snow behind him. Greater than, you shouldn't have looked. He turned. Lydia stood there, coat dusted with frost, eyes faintly glowing green. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. Greater than, it's not the same deal anymore, she said quietly. It doesn't need a name every winter. Now it takes when it's ready. It writes the names itself. Dash dash dash. Harlan swallowed hard. Why mine? Lydia glanced down at the ledger. Because you came up here alone. That's all it needs now, an invitation. He looked around, desperate for some way out. Then tell me how to erase it. You did it before. Her expression darkened. Erasing the first name broke the chain. Now there is no first name. The fog isn't bound to one bargain anymore. It's hungry. And there's no keeper to control it, only someone to deliver. Dash dash dash. The snow started falling harder, wind picking up. The fog rose like water in a flood, swirling around them both. Lydia stepped closer, pressing the ledger into his hands. You can try to run, but it'll follow you. Better to write another name. Give it something else. Harlan's breath came fast. I'm not doing that. She tilted her head. Then I'll have to do it for you. Dash dash dash. The last thing he remembered clearly was her opening the book and dipping a pen into the snow. Though it wasn't snow anymore, it was something dark, liquid, and alive. When Harlan woke, he was back in his truck at the bottom of the ridge. The ledger was gone, his boots were wet, and he couldn't remember his middle name. Dash dash dash. In the weeks that followed, more people vanished. Not just hikers, locals, truckers, even 2 kids walking home from school. And in every case, their names appeared in the book that no one could ever seem to find. By midwinter, the ridge was off limits. But that didn't stop people from seeing the lantern light through the trees at night, or hearing the slow, steady crunch of boots in the snow. Some said it was Lydia, still walking her patrol. Others swore it was Mercer. And a few whispered that it was someone new, someone who had just learned what the fog really was, and was already carrying the ledger to its next name. The story goes that if you're driving past Hollow Ridge on a winter night and see a figure by the roadside, you should keep going. If you stop, they'll ask for your name. And if you give it, the snow will cover your tracks before you take another step. Call to action. If this chilling legend kept you hooked, share it with other mystery lovers, subscribe for more haunting tales, and leave a comment about the scariest part for you. Your name might just be the next one written.